Welcome everyone. Tonight is Happy Chanukah. Tonight is not Chanukah themed. However, if you have questions that have to do with like books of the Maccabees, etc., in Q&A, go for it. Okay. Tonight, what we're going to be talking about is Akhenaten, who is the monotheistic pharaoh. But before we start talking about Akhenaten, I'd like to say a few words about some Josephs, because we're in the middle of the Joseph stories. We're talking about Egypt. I'd like to talk about some of our parallels. Am I coming through okay to everyone? Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay. So if we take a look at the Joseph stories, some of the elements that are unusual in the Joseph stories are elements that we find particularly in Egypt. Famously, and this is kind of a weak parallel. Let's start with a weak parallel because it's kind of known. There's an Egyptian story about two brothers. Everyone, please mute your mics. There's a story about two brothers where the older brother's wife essentially comes onto the younger brother when the older brother's away, and the younger brother's like, no, how could I do such a thing? And then when the older brother comes back, the wife accuses the younger brother of attacking her. Okay, so it's a very similar story to the Potiphar's wife story with Joseph. So that's one pretty well-known parallel. Another parallel is dreams. This is in your handout, actually. If you look at the very last page of your handout, this is from Pritchard. Okay, the interpretation of dreams. It says Egyptian texts, translator John A. Wilson. This is page 13 in your handout, which is the last page. And it starts the interpretation of dreams, a recently discovered hieratic papyrus, and you have it's essentially a text from the 19th dynasty that says how do you interpret different things you see in a dream, right? If you see white bread being given to him, that's good. Seeing a large cat is good. Plunging into the river is good. Seeing the moon as it shines is good. Seeing his face mirror is bad. Right? Seeing himself with a pain in his side is bad. Seeing the catching of birds, bad. Looking into a deep well, bad. And essentially what you have here is a kind of a divination text for using dreams to tell the future. Now, why this is important, you'd say, well, that's a pretty obvious thing to have. But the truth is that it is unusual in the ancient Near East. I shouldn't say the ancient, because there's the ancient Near East and there's Egypt. These are two separate things. They've always been two separate things. They have different cultures. They have different religions. They have different ways of seeing things. They had very different agricultural realities, right? Where the Nile is just considered where the Nile is very important. They each have their rivers, but Egypt can really rely on the Nile in a way that in the ancient Near East, the Tigris and Euphrates seem to be not quite as not they're reliable, but you can't use them to irrigate your entire land the same way that they do in Egypt. So you have a very different very different culture in Egypt and a different calendar. And one of the things that's different in Egypt is in the ancient Near East, you don't do divination from dreams generally. You do divination from sheep livers, and there's something to do with arrows, which we don't really know what it is exactly. And sometimes the way sheep are born, if they're born with deformities, they do things like with that. So there are specific ways to kind of find the future, and it doesn't generally include dreams. This was a classic way in Egypt to get a dream. The Pharaoh could go to a special room in the temple and try to get a dream that would tell him what he should do or the future. So this was a means of telling the future. And of course, these dreams are central to the Joseph story from the very beginning. Right? From the very beginning, he's having these dreams that he's interpreting that can easily be interpreted in an oracular way. And these dreams of themselves kind of lead him to Egypt, as it were, and where he continues to interpret dreams, right? And that's a kind of very Egyptian feature of the Joseph stories. And Danny Barkai is pointing out the flooding of the Euphrates and Tigris is often catastrophic, right? Unlike the Nile, right, where flooding was the way to irrigate fields. And in fact, because Egypt could rely so much on the Nile, their agriculture was actually much more primitive, just because they didn't need to be that sophisticated with irrigation, etc. Now, so the question is, and Hill asked this, does this indicate the Hebrews were a link between Egypt and the Near East? That's one of the things that we're going to talk about as we talk about Akhenaten, right? Because there's the question is, we know what Akhenaten did, and the question is, why and where did he get this idea? So let's just jump in. Okay, so who was Akhenaten? When we discovered Akhenaten in the 1890s, okay, in 1890, I think it was 1897, I believe, the Amarna letters were discovered. The Amarna letters are actually very important for understanding the political situation in the ancient Near East, and particularly the situation during what's called the Amarna period between Egypt and the Canaanite groups. If you want to know about what was going on in Canaan during that period and their relations with Egypt, the Amarna letters are super important. We're not going to talk about them today because we're talking about kind of the political relations, but they are very linked to Akhenaten because, of course, they were during his period and beyond. And then they started excavating the palace, the tombs, was Akhenaten, right? The area that Akhenaten created. So let's talk a little bit about Akhenaten. Let's look at, and I think maybe I'll share my screen just so you get a map, get a decent map of where this is happening. Here we are. Now, this is you have this in your handout, but I am going to share my screen, I think, so we can kind of discuss it. Give me a moment. There we go. Okay. Okay. All right. So if we take a look at this, okay. So here, why is that doing that? That's not what I wanted. Spotlight. Thank you. Okay. Now, Akhenaten, when Akhenaten rises to power, he's actually not he's not Akhenaten. He's Amenhotep the Fourth. Okay. His father is very successful. Amenhotep the Third. He's Amenhotep the Fourth, and the religious center of Egypt is in Thebes. Thebes is where Amun-Re is worshipped, particularly Amun or Amun-Re. This is the most important religion in Egypt. Okay, it gets the vast majority of the state funding. The priests are very powerful, and the Pharaoh himself is kind of is the son of Amun-Re, of course, but there's this kind of legitimacy going on where each legitimizes the other, right? Amun-Re legitimizes the Pharaoh legitimizes Amun-Re. He gives support to Amun-Re, and so the worship of Amun is very, very, very central, and that's going on in Thebes. The administrative center is in Memphis, up north, but in Lower Egypt. Now, when Akhenaten, the person who's going to become Akhenaten, okay, who's Amenhotep the Fourth, when he rises to power, he continues to support Thebes, but he creates a competing religion, essentially, with the worship of Aten, the sun disk. And he does that actually close by in Karnak. You can't see it here in this map, but it's really close to Thebes. So right next to Thebes, he has this other center, right? Where he creates this worship of the Aten. Now, the Aten was known before, right? It was just another aspect of the sun. Remember, Amun Re, so Re is the sun. So you've already got this kind of combined god. Amun was the local god that took on Re, the sun. In the beginning, the Aten is depicted as one would expect from an Egyptian god. It's a man's body with a falcon head, sun disk above it, right? So you have a standard idol type depiction of the Aten, of the sun disk. Around the 4th or 5th year, he's like, enough of this. We don't quite know what caused it, perhaps because the priests were getting too rowdy about having this Aten worship, and he's like, forget it, we're moving the center of the religion to my new place, Akhenaten, which he built pretty much from the ground up. Now, he built both centers very, very quickly. They created a new way of building in Egypt. Egypt had been building pyramids, etc., with these very, very, very large stones, and they started doing these bricks that were three hand lengths long. You'll hear them called a talatat, from shalosh. Talatat is an Arabic word. That's the modern name for it because it's 3 hand bricks. That's not the Egyptian name for these bricks. But this was something that he was tremendously revolutionary in what he did in terms of everything, the way they built, the type of art, the architecture, etc. Here, so what was the worship of the Aten? So let's go to, I'm still in your handout. Let's go to this. I'm trying to decide which one to talk about first. Let's go to this first. Let me erase this line that has been apparently created. Hold on. Is it from this? Okay, there we go. All right. So there. All right. Okay, so what we see here, and this is important to note, this is the Aten, this is the sun disk. This is the most abstract you can possibly get in terms of something to worship, and it's very, very unusual. It's unusual for the entire area. It's certainly unusual in Egypt, right, where you're used to having depictions of gods, okay? And here you have the sun disk, and it's handing out. It's here you see the hands. It's generally handing out life and health and strength, okay, prosperity, and it's usually holding things like the Ankh and things like that, and symbols of these different things it's giving them. In this case, here it's Akhenaten and Nefertiti. There is, as you can see from the caption, they're each offering boxes decorated with the emblems of their divine counterparts, Shu and Tefnut, because Shu and Tefnut are the divine. So what he's creating is what Akhenaten is essentially creating is not standard monotheism. Okay, now obviously there are different interpretations. Some people actually want to say that he wanted to create atheism. I think that's going really, really far. But what he's doing is he's like, okay, I'm the son of the Aten, right? And my wife is so there's a triad here that was already recognized as you've got the creator and his divine twins. And that was already in Egyptian mythology. And he's taking this and he's transferring it to the Aten, Akhenaten himself. He changes his name to Akhenaten, and his wife Nefertiti, who also takes an Aten name. Their 3 daughters are here. These are their 3 daughters. Note the weird shape of their skulls. Okay, no one knows if they are actually had some kind of disease or something that made them have these skulls like this, even though that actually is a theory, or whether this was part of the very weird art change that happened under Akhenaten. Not only did he start saying, okay, the only god to worship is the Aten, okay, and you worship it. The ones who worship the Aten directly are me, Akhenaten, and my wife Nefertiti, and sometimes they include their oldest daughter in that. But the royal family has direct contact with the Aten, and you guys all worship the royal family. That's how it's supposed to work. Okay. Now, if we go, if we take a look here, we can see the very strange art that apparently, and we have at least one reference to the fact that the king himself, that Akhenaten himself, said, I want things drawn this way. Okay, I'm gonna make this, let's make this a little bit bigger here. Okay, so here, okay, here's the Aten hanging out. You see the Ankh that's hanging out life and all sorts of stuff like that. To Akhenaten and Nefertiti, you notice a few things. They've got these wrinkles. They've got these weird elongated necks, weird looking faces, right? They have pot bellies. See that kind of pot belly? This is Akhenaten. Okay, now in general, pharaohs were, if you've seen pharaohs, they're usually depicted as being pretty darn fit, and in a kind of a very standardized standard of up to a standard of beauty, right? Akhenaten changed that. Okay, he's kind of skinny. He's got this kind of pot belly. He's kind of ugly, right? And so is everyone else in the picture. Okay, that's one thing he did. Another thing he did, all right, is that this is, and I'm relying on the experts here, this is the first time that you have these very intimate family portraits here, where they're kind of playing with their kids right on their laps, and basking in the glow of the Aten, right? So you have this kind of family portrait that's very unusual, okay, for this kind of for Egypt in general. Okay, you don't have that. He changed the art. Now it doesn't completely continue, but he changed the art, he changed the attitude, and his theology was completely new. So this is, let me actually, before I start with the theology, I'd like to say a few things about some exceptions to this kind of, like, we automatically think, okay, he sets up the Aten, no other gods. Well, you know what? As soon as he sets up Akhenaten, which is the horizon of the Aten, right, which is this place where he's going to have the palaces and the tombs and the temples to the Aten, which becomes very, very central in the theology. One of the first things he does is he says, I'm going to establish an necropolis here of the sacred bull. That's the I wrote it down because I didn't want to forget the name, and now of course I lost my place. So the Menevis bull, right? So it doesn't always trip off my tongue. So the Menevis bull, right? He's like, okay, we're gonna move the necropolis of the Menevis bull to Akhenaten. And you say, well, this is the holy bull that they worshipped in Heliopolis. All right. Now it's possible. So what some people think is that what he wanted to do was, by doing this, was showing, Heliopolis, of course, was involved in the worship of the sun. And so he wanted to kind of take the Menevis bull and say that worship of the sun, right, from Heliopolis, he wanted to take it and say, now all the worship is here in Akhenaten. It is the worthy heir of the worship of the sun, but the sun is now the Aten. It's not Re, it's not Amun Re, it's nothing personified. It's this very abstract disc, which is very, very peculiar to have in Egypt, or anywhere. Right? It's not personified anymore once he moves to Akhenaten. And not only that, but the entire theology changes. So what we have until Akhenaten comes with his religious reforms, we had this kind of belief that when you die, you're judged by Osiris, and then you're either good or you're not good. If you've lived according to Maat, right? Then you get good things. You have, your servants that pass with you into the afterlife, etc. So there's a whole afterlife that you get to enjoy. In the kind of theology of Akhenaten as it was developed in full once he created Akhenaten, I'm sure you pronounce it Akhenaten, but excuse me, I'm just going to keep on calling it Akhenaten. The idea was that all people who would worship the Pharaoh and Nefertiti as they went through, and worship the Aten. They would go through. There was kind of this kind of boulevard. They would go down towards the temple of the Aten, and there was a window of receiving where they would kind of spread. Actually, let me now share. Let me share the screen with you for just a moment because I think this one, okay. And I'll show you another image that kind of shows this, which is not in your handout. All right. Here you see, in this image, you see all the people are worshiping. Who are they worshiping? This is Akhenaten and Nefertiti and their 3 daughters, right? And up above is the Aten. So the Aten is extending life and prosperity, et cetera, to Akhenaten and Nefertiti and their 3 daughters. They are then giving it to the masses, to all the people around them. They're not really the masses; it's really the elite who follow them to Akhenaten, right? Maybe there are some workmen here, et cetera, and it looks like they're performers. But this is how it works. You worship Akhenaten and Nefertiti and their 3 daughters. They are your kind of your kind of intermediary with the Aten. Okay. So if we go back to here, so you see, it's not exactly monotheism. It's a system where you worship the royal family. They are in direct contact with the Aten, and if you do everything right, then what happens after you die is you awake in the morning when the Aten comes out. You live in the morning, you live during the day, and you live at the temple. Okay, that's your life now. Your life is at the temple of the Aten. Okay, and only during the day, because at night the Aten goes away and you go back to being kind of dead. So it's a completely different way of looking at death in Egypt. And one of the big questions, so there are all sorts of questions. First of all, where did this come from? And second, why'd he do it? Okay, so why he did it, I think most people see it as as an obvious. I'm going to stop sharing. Most people see it as an obvious sorry, I'm gonna make a pause here because I'm already distracted by the questions, so I'll just answer the questions and I will get back to this. So Susan asked, what are the images of life and prosperity in the figures? I don't think you see prosperity in those figures. You see mainly Ankh, like the life sign. There are other figures that I've seen in the past, I'm pretty sure, where you see a variety of little symbols that are being given out, and those are, I think, Ankh, prosperity, the life, prosperity, and the health, I believe. Which is like a standard. It's a standard formula to say after any like Pharaoh's name or God's name or anyone you're saying, you will say, I wish you life, prosperity, and health. So it's so standard that in English translations of Egyptian texts, you'll frequently find LPH. That just means life, prosperity, health, right? So because they just always go together, and it's a really standard formula. Isn't Heliopolis a Greek name? Yes, it is a Greek name. So it's a later name. It's a later name for Heliopolis. So okay, so going back to it. So why did Akhenaten do what he did? Yes.
Miriam, I don't
Yeah?
think I understand what Egyptian belief was other than a belief in Osiris to understand what.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, good point. First of all, Egyptians believed in a lot of different gods. A lot of different gods. There was a pantheon, like there were pantheons and everywhere else. Now, Amun-Re was the really important god in Egypt at this time. Okay, and the pharaoh was considered to be the son of Amun-Re, right? Who managed to impregnate the queen in some way, but he was also the son, of course, of the previous pharaoh. But it all worked, right? It's all this and this is true, right? I'm the son of the god and also the son of the previous pharaoh. But it was a standard thing that the pharaoh was considered to be quite literally the son of Amun-Re. Okay. And that was a basic part of Egyptian belief. But you also had Osiris, who was the god of the dead, was also very, very important, right? And was important in judging your body, your soul, essentially your soul when it goes into the underworld. And there are all sorts of other gods, like you have the Menevis, the sacred bull. You have a host of gods, throughout Egypt. Now, the main cult that Akhenaten was fighting against was Amun-Re. Okay. In fact, there's a record. I tried to find it for this class. I wasn't able to find it in time. There was a record of kind of donations to like smaller regional temples that Akhenaten gave. Now, it could have been in the first 4 years of his reign. The first 4 years of his reign, he was much milder in terms of supporting all these different religious cults. Where and particularly in Amun-Re, the cult at Thebes, he gave some support to, but he really cut them off once he moved to Akhenaten. Now, now that leads me to why would he do this? Clearly, the priests were getting really, really powerful. But the priesthood, the worship in Thebes was getting very, very powerful, and because the pharaoh's legitimacy depended on the worship of Amun-Re, the way it was set up, right? He's the son of Amun-Re, and that whole thing. It's possible that he wanted to take this power away from the Theban priesthood and create a new religion. Now, why would the religion be this extremely different? Okay, that I think we're all trying to kind of figure out. And I'm not involved in it directly, but you could try to figure it out, right? And there are some ideas. Okay, now one of the ideas is it because of Semitic influence? All right, was there an influence of the Hebrews, quote unquote, and somehow the idea of now, by the way, this isn't like this doesn't work with biblical chronology, right? It's not saying, even though there are some who like to say, what is a new pharaoh who didn't know Joseph? Well, Akhenaten, once he dies, is essentially his religion's totally wiped out. So like, what if Joseph kind of came and gave him this idea of like kind of a general, kind of an abstract, unseen God who's the one God, and it's a nice idea, right? His father and he have a vizier who is in fact a Semite. We know because his name is Aper El, and if your name ends in El, you're either a Semite or from Krypton. But right? But so if you have a name like Aper El, you know you're a Semite. They know that this person's a Semite. This person's from that belief system where there's El, who is the god. There's an article, I think from 2012 in the BAR, in the Biblical Archaeology Review, which wants to say that his original name was actually Abdi-El, because sometimes Abdi is written Aper in Egyptian transcription, and that would make it that I'm the servant of El, which is nice, but it's a conjecture. So you have this vizier who is a Semite, who serves both Amenhotep III, Akhenaten's father, and Akhenaten himself. However, he doesn't seem to be particularly monotheistic in his tomb, etc. He kind of goes with whatever the going religion is. So it doesn't seem like he necessarily is particularly bringing his Semitic religion. However, you could say if someone knows of a religion whereby you can have a single God who is not personified, because it's such a bizarre idea in this period, and it's like, where is it coming from? How do you have this idea? Okay, you want to move something from Thebes, so find a different cult to support. I mean, he creates an entirely new cult centered around this abstract sun disk, the Aten. Okay. Now what happens? I think I'm gonna go right away to what happens after he dies, right? After he's gone. First of all, he wasn't very successful diplomatically. I think now some people are taking a second look at him and saying, oh yeah, he was better diplomatically than what we thought. He didn't support, like, there are issues with the Hittite Empire, and he didn't particularly act very strongly against them, particularly in the Canaanite region. We know from the Amarna letters. He kind of kept in a holding pattern. But his son, if we take a look at our in our source sheet, if you look at now we're going to start reading some text. Okay, so I'm going to go straight to, this is page 11 of your handout. That's Pritchard, and it's page 251 of Pritchard. It says 251 on the page, and it says Tutankhamun's restoration after the Amarna Revolution. Now, Tutankhamun was originally, I believe, Akhenaten. He was named after the Aten originally, and he changed his name to. They all changed their name. In other words, everyone who was named after the Aten, pretty much. Actually, I think not his oldest daughter, but they changed it to Amon. Maybe also his older daughter. They changed it to Amon. In other words, as soon as Akhenaten was gone, they said, we're going to go back to the old ways, and we're going to restore Ammon. We're going to restore Ammon, the worship of Ammon, the worship of Amun-Re as the central worship in Egypt. And here we can see what he put on his stela, what Tutankhamun did. The good ruler, performing benefactions for his father Ammon and all the gods, for he has made what was ruined to endure as a monument for the ages of eternity. And he has expelled deceit throughout the two lands, and justice was set up so that it might make lying to be an abomination of the land as in its first time. Now, when his majesty appeared as king, the temples of the gods and goddesses from Elephantine down to the marshes of the Delta had gone to pieces. Their shrines had become desolate, had become mounds overgrown with weeds. Their sanctuaries were as if they had never been. Their halls were a footpath. The land was topsy-turvy, and the gods turned their backs upon this land. If the army was sent to Jahi to extend the frontiers of Egypt, no success of theirs came at all. So this is where they think that apparently there was an attempt to fight the Hittite Empire, and it was not successful. If one prayed to a god to seek counsel from him, he would never come at all. If one made supplication to a goddess similarly, she would never come at all, right? And what's the obvious reason for them? Their hearts were hurt in their bodies so that they did damage to that which had been made. Okay, now after the days had passed by this, his majesty appeared upon the throne of his father. He ruled the regions of Horus. The black land and the red land were under his authority, and every land was bowing down to the glory of him. Now when his majesty was in his palace, which is in the house of Akheper-Kare, like Re in the heavens, then his majesty was conducting the affairs of this land and the daily needs of the two banks. So his majesty deliberated plans with his heart, searching for any beneficial deed, seeking out acts of service for his father Ammon, right? And fashioning his august image of genuine fine gold. He surpassed what had been done previously. He fashioned his father Ammon upon 13 carrying poles, his holy image being of fine gold, lapis lazuli, etc., etc., etc. So he made a special monument for Ammon. And then you see in the next paragraph that he made monuments for the gods, their cult statues of genuine fine gold, etc. He restored the worship of all these different gods that had been neglected. Okay, so we see Akhenaten is called the heretic king because he is not from an Egyptian point of view. He's not a monotheist. He's a heretic. He destroyed the worship of all these gods that were the traditional gods of Egypt, okay, including Amun-Re, including all of them. So
who is Amun-Re? He's not the sun god. Who is he? Or
He's the combined sun god. So if you think of Re as Ra, we say Re, it's Ra. Okay, so it's Amun-Ra or Amun-Re. Amun was a local god that became kind of combined with Ra. So he's the sun god and kind of the everything god. We're going to read in a little bit. We're going to read a hymn to the Aten, but frankly, they're somewhat similar hymns to Amun-Re also. There's absolutely a hymn that talks about him as if he's the only god. So the idea of actually, and I do want to say this also, the idea, and what I find unbelievably revolutionary about the worship of the Aten by Akhenaten is that is the abstract nature of the Aten, not just choosing one god. Because honestly, we see a lot of texts that are written as if the god is the one god. So if I look, at my handy the literature of ancient Egypt, there are all sorts of hymns that, and even, or if you open up Pritchard even has like hymns. I think he has Egyptian hymns addressing the god as if it's the only god, right? So, and really, I was looking for the hymn to the Aten, which we're going to be reading soon, and I started reading a hymn to Amun, thinking that it was that, and it was very easy to, because it was addressing Amun as like the one creator god, etc. So this idea of addressing the supreme God as if he's the only God is not actually that new. Okay, to Egypt. All right, but having this very abstract kind of disc, and that's the God. That is it. On the one hand, it's revolutionary. On the other hand, it makes it much more necessary to have the royal family to worship, because you need a person to worship, right? I mean, in the minds of Egyptians, you need a kind of a form. You need something to focus on to worship, so you can focus on the royal family. Now, also something that is exaggerated when they talk about this, the worship of the royal family and not directly of the Aten. It's not really true when we read letters where they say, "May you be blessed to the Aten." You know, I ask the Aten for blessings for you, right? In the letter, like of a regular person, right? So or a regular noble, right? So you don't. It's not really that extreme that people didn't think that they could address the Aten directly at all. Does Akhenaten regard himself as the son of Aten? Absolutely. He is constantly called the son of Aten. He's constantly calling the Aten my father. Constantly calling the Aten my father. Okay, that's a very basic kind of part of the way he addresses the Aten. Okay, so let's look at an example. And this example is one of the things that they point to when actually I'm going to read off the screen. So this is in your handout. This is one of the things they point to when they talk about biblical parallels, because they read it together with Mizmor Kuf Daled, Psalm 104, in terms of the images. And in fact, there's even been arguments that the psalm is based on this hymn, which I don't see. I don't see that the parallel is so great that you would say that. But there are enough people who argue about it. I feel like there's maybe some parallels that I'm missing. So let's take a quick look at that. So that is in your handout. It is on page, let's see, it's on page it's on page 7 of your handout. It's in Hoffmeyer's book, page 218. By the way, I give you the cover pages of the text I'm taking these sources from, so you know where I took them from, and to give them the proper credit. Okay, so he has a translation of the great hymn in the tomb of I. This is where we get this hymn of the Aten. They found it in the tomb of I that was in this official who was in that's part of the greater Akhenaten complex. Okay. Adoration of Hor Aten. Beautiful you appear from the horizon of heaven, O living Aten who initiates life. For you are risen from the eastern horizon and have filled every land with your beauty. For you are fair, great, dazzling, and high over every land, and your rays enclose the land to the limit of all you have made. For you are Re, having reached their limit and subdued them, your beloved son. For although you are far away, your rays it should be have reached. I think I subdued them to your beloved son. For although you're far away, your rays are upon the earth and you are perceived. When your movements vanish and you set in the western horizon, the land is in darkness in the manner of death. People, they lie in bedchambers, heads covered up, and one eye does not see its fellow. All their property is robbed, although it is under their heads, and they do not realize it. Every lion is out of its den, all creeping things bite. Darkness gathers, the land is silent. The one who made them is set in his horizon. But the land grows bright when you are risen from the horizon, shining in the orb in the daytime. You push back the darkness and give forth your rays. The two lands are in festival of light. Awaken, standing on legs, for you have lifted them up, etc., etc., etc. Let's go a little bit. All flocks are content with their pasturage. Trees and grasses flourish. Birds are flown from their nests, their wings adoring your ka. I hear a sound. Everyone, please mute your microphones. Birds are flown from their nests, their wings adoring your ka. all small cattle prance upon their legs. All that fly up and alight, they live when you rise for them. Ships go downstream and upstream as well, every road being open at your appearance. Fish upon the river lead up in front of you, and your rays are within the great green sea. Okay, so before we go on, let me read a little bit of Psalm 104 of Mizmor Kuf Daled for you, so that you can kind of get where the parallels. I'm just going to read it in English to save us a little time, because we're going to be going back and forth. Okay, so bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord, my God, you are very great. You are clothed in glory and majesty, wrapped in a robe of light. You spread the heavens like a tent cloth. He sets the rafters of his lofts in the waters, makes the clouds his chariot, moves on the wings of the wind. He makes the winds his messengers, fiery flames his servants. He established the earth on its foundations, so that it shall never totter. You made the deep covered as a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. They fled at your blast, rushed away at the sound of your thunder, mountains rising, valleys sinking to the place you established for them. You set bounds they must not pass, so that they never again cover the earth. You make springs gush forth in torrents. They make their way between the hills, giving drink to all the wild beasts. The wild asses slake their thirst. The bird. This is all. I could see, I could read it in Hebrew and you'd recognize, of course, the actual Mizmor, but I'm just going to keep reading in English so you hear the meaning right away. The birds of the sky dwell beside them and sing among the foliage. You water the mountains from your lofts. The earth is sated from the fruit of your work. You make the grass grow for the cattle and herbage for man's labor, that he may get food out of the earth, wine that cheers the hearts of men, oil that makes the face shine, and bread that sustains man's life. The trees of the Lord drink their fill, the cedars of Lebanon his own planting. Where birds make their nests, the stork has their home. The junipers, the high mountain, are for wild goats. The crags are a refuge for rock badgers. Okay, and here, this is probably one of the clearest parallels what I'm about to read to you. Okay, so that's Parakuf Daled, Pasuk. So it's 104 verses 19 to 23. So that's Kuf Daled Yutet to Chaf Gimel. He made the moon to mark the seasons. The sun knows when to set. You bring on darkness, and it is night when all the beasts of the forest stir. The lions roar for prey, seeking their food from God. When the sun rises, they come home and couch in their dens. Man then goes out to his work, to his labor, until the evening. Now, I want to point something out to you here. I want to point something out to you here, which is unlike what you have, and there is some very clear. The tone is similar. The tone is similar in that saying, "Look at you, and you do all these things, and you do everything." Okay, but the meaning is very clearly not similar. In other words, the Aten really does talk about how amazing everything is during the day, and at night everything is horrible. Whereas in our psalm, the night is when certain animals come out. Certain animals come out at night. That's when these animals come out. So you made day and night. You have the moon come out, right? Now you could say, well, that one is in response to the other, right? You could say, well, this is showing, no, it's not the sun, right? God made everything. God made the moon at night and these animals that only come out at night, right? So where's the sun in that? Aten, right? but we have a very but the tone is similar. I'm going to keep reading this the Mizmor, the Psalm, because we're going to see a little bit more of a parallel. How many are the things you have made, O Lord? You have made them all with wisdom. The earth is full of your creations. There's the sea, vast and wide, with its creatures beyond number, living things, small and great. There go the ships and Leviathan that you formed to sport with. All of them, Leviathan, of course, Leviathan. All of them look to you to give them their food when it is due. Give it to them, they gather it up. Open your hand, they are well satisfied. Hide your face, they are terrified. Take away their breath, they perish and turn again into dust. Send back your breath, they are created, and you renew the face of the earth. Let us go back for a moment to our hymn to the Aten. Okay. Remember that we have also the ships that are brought up in conjunction with the fish, right? In the Aten, where here we have the Leviathan and the ships, which are a little bit unusual to come up in a psalm like this, but still not that big a parallel. And then we have the idea of giving life. So I'm reading now. I'm on page 8 of your handout, page 219 of the book it is taken from. Oh, you who brings into being fetuses in women, who make fluid in people, who gives life to the son in his mother's womb and calms him by stopping his tears, nurse in the womb, who gives breath to animate all he makes when it descends from the womb, etc. It keeps on talking about how he made all life. Okay. And now continuing on, how manifold it is. I'm skipping a little bit ahead. How manifold it is what you have made, although mysterious in the face of humanity. O sole God, without another beside him. You create the earth according to your wish, being alone. People, all large and small, animals, all things which are on earth, which go on legs, which rise up and fly by means of their wings. Right? This is very similar to some of the things we've seen and things that we see in other Psalms, particularly when we have, oh, soul God, without another beside him. We have that line almost exactly in other Psalms. You make the inundation from the underworld. You bring it to the place you wish in order to cause the subjects to live. Inasmuch as you made them for yourself, their Lord entirely, who was weird with them. So also the idea that you can make things live again, which we have in our psalm. Now, and it keeps going. You made heaven far away just to rise in it. I'm skipping to the end of the page. You made heaven far away just to rise in it, to see all you make, being unique and arisen in your aspects of being as living Aten, manifest, shining, far, near. You make millions of developments from yourself, you who are a oneness. Cities, towns, fields, the path of the river. Every eye observes you in relation to them, for you are Aten of the daytime above the earth. You have traveled just so that everybody might exist. You create their faces so that you might not see yourself as the only thing which you make. Now, it's actually what's interesting here to me is less at specific parallels to one specific psalm, but the parallels to this idea of a monotheistic God who created everything, who had to have a reason to create people. Why'd you create people? Well, I was sick of seeing my own face, right? So like you created, they see you all the time. You are a oneness, right? All these different aspects of monotheism coming forward in this hymn to the Aten, which is fascinating for me personally. And the questions, and again, so could it be that Akhenaten got this idea from some kind of Semitic influence, right? That he had this idea of having an abstract singular God, right? Like the sun disk, right? That then would enable his own his own operation to change the power structure in Egypt, to make himself and his family very clearly the center of the entire power structure, because they're not only the rulers, they're the very center of the religion. And what better way to do that than with an abstract God who is the only God, quote unquote, while you may still provide for some other gods, and who is hard to worship, who is very hard to worship, because an abstract singular God is hard to worship, right? So you're going to worship the royal family. You're going to look towards the royal family in this religion of the Aten. Okay. Or, as Robin says, were the Semites influenced by Akhenaten? There's Jan Assmann, famously, he says Moses, right? He says Akhenaten and Moses. Was Moses, this is a famous question, was Moses influenced by Akhenaten? Okay. For Moses to be influenced by Akhenaten, though, you only have this short period of time, because Akhenaten's years, let me take a look, and so I can give you the whole chronology. I know you guys like that. Here we are. Okay, so if we're Akhenaten, okay, and again, the problem is that dating biblical stuff is very, very difficult. So if there's a kind of almost a tradition at this point of dating the leaving Egypt to Ramses II, he's 1279 to 1213. Akhenaten is 1353 to 1336. Okay, and that's it. In other words, when Amenhotep III is ruling, 1390 to 1353, it's Amun-Re all the way. There is no, forget the Aten, right? When Akhenaten is ruling, it's 1353 to 1336. After he has it pretty much from the beginning. It reaches its full force around about 4 years in. 4 or 5 years in. Okay. Then you have Neferuaten, who might be Nefertiti, you're not sure. Smenkhkare, they're not sure who it is. Tutankhamun, once you get to Tutankhamun, that's in 1332 to 1322. Once you get to Tutankhamun, that's it. That's it. It's over. It's already been over, but with under Tutankhamun, that's it. Eventually Akhenaten is actually wiped out from the history books. A lot of it has to do with him being the heretical king. Also, once Horemheb takes power, he kind of wipes out the previous kings, because Horemheb is a whole power thing. Horemheb is a military general and he's regent to Tutankhamun, and once he manages to take the throne, he wipes out kind of mentions of the previous pharaohs. But Akhenaten is wiped out from the history books. So the question is, if you for it to have any a real that you it's hard to know, because the big question always is with these things, how much does something like this go underground? And I would claim not a lot, and I'll tell you why I think so. Because this was very much not a ground roots religion. This was very much the king saying, this is going to be the religion now. You, the elite who are going to live in Akhenaten, you guys are going to believe in this Aten. And you're going to, every second word out of your mouth is going to be Aten. They're like, okay, your majesty, that's the way it works. We like living, right? But it's not a ground roots movement at all. It's very short-lived, and there's no real reason to keep it up, especially since the Aten has already been a manifestation of the sun god. Like, it's very easy to just kind of shift it right back to Amun-Re. So there's no real reason for it to go underground in any particular way. You could say, could it influence the Semites in that window, right? In that window. Which, I mean, certainly there's a lot of contact with Canaan, right? With Canaan. There's a lot of contact with Canaan during this period. Okay. Egypt is very heavily involved in Canaan. So you could absolutely say, okay, there's something going back and forth. Now, again, he doesn't have to have a Semitic vizier to get this idea. He could simply do it through learning things that are going on, maybe in Canaan, maybe, he can have, because he had a correspondence, right? And there are people going back and forth, and there was a pretty active wisdom school in Egypt. So could there have been but for it to influence the other way, you have a pretty short window for that to happen. That doesn't make it impossible, but it's a small window for it to happen. So I would, and obviously I'm biased. I gotta say, obviously I'm biased, right? So I obviously I would like to say more that it was a Semitic, that he got this as a Semitic idea. It got to him, and he's like, this is perfect. I assume he liked the idea also. I mean, I assume that the idea also spoke to him. Notice how many revolutions he made in art, in depiction. He changed so much in building materials. Like, he changed so much. It's really unbelievable. I think he's the sort of person, he's one of those visionaries. Like, I think he's one of those visionary people, right? Whether or not he had a power reason, like a power play reason to make the move he did, I think that he was a visionary. I think he liked this idea of the Aten. I think it worked with this general sun worship that already existed, but it diverged. It ended up diverging so much from it. It's hard for me to believe he came up with the whole thing without any sort of influence. And I think it was and I think the fact that it was I don't want to say a foreign idea. The fact that it was a top-down idea is evidenced by the fact that it was so effectively wiped out afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to read a comment. Wiping out from the history books apparently also meant dismantling the temple stone for stone. Apparently, it's happened a lot in Egypt. It's amazing how much survived in spite of this. It's dismantling it stone for stone, and also you can reuse the stones. So it's a great reason to dismantle a temple. Like, why leave it if it's illegitimate? You can use those stones. They reused the bricks all over the place. And they could find it. They also you could see it. They also defaced Akhenaten, they really, you know, they really did not like him, and he was wiped out of the history books. We had to discover him through archaeological discoveries. So um um so I'm going to that's pretty much the class. I'm gonna break for questions for two things. Akhenaten. So Akhenaten, and also Chanukah, Maccabees, whatever, since it's Chanukah. Now I do want to say though, in conclusion, because I'm going to conclude this piece, it was in this is possibly the class with the least biblical parallels that I had to show you. But I can't see teaching this class without going over Akhenaten. Mm-hmm. Because it's so fascinating and it's such a fantastic period in Egypt, and it shows you that this idea of a single abstract God, you know, you could say, well, it wasn't maybe accepted by the little people, or didn't have staying power, or at least not in Egypt, but you have this hymn that could absolutely, you could take that hymn and with a few changes put it into the Psalms, right? And there's certain things that they say about the oxen that you're like, oh yeah, you could totally take that, right? And just switch it over. And this idea, and again, it's so intriguing. Where did he get this idea of not just a single God? Because that was not hard. That's not that hard. But a single abstract God, you know, that you can't easily interact with or picture or anthropomorphize. And with that, I'll move to your questions. I see that someone has written a comment and aside from Susan. Heard a commentary that the idea that the sun god on which the whole world depends emerges each day after traveling through the underworld is what made Makat Choshech so terrifying to the Egyptians, right? The plague of darkness so terrifying to the Egyptians. Darkness, when the sun god should have emerged, meant the whole order of the world was overturned. That's an excellent point. I think that is actually an excellent point, that a plague of darkness in Egypt would have a lot more meaning than a plague of darkness elsewhere. Because if this is a basis of kind of your religious belief, you've got the sun going down, going through the underworld, coming out. It's that's a big part of your religious beliefs. And then all of a sudden having just darkness would mean more, even though I imagine it would be terrifying anywhere in the ancient Near East. But it would be more, especially since in a lot of the ancient Near East, they would kind of roll with astrological phenomena. I mean, they might read things into it, but they're like, yeah, stars happen, you know. So like they absolutely kept track of things, but I don't know how. I'm not sure. My understanding, what I learned, that this is based on my kind of lectures I've been in, as opposed to my own reading, my own kind of research, that especially in like kind of Akkadian astrology, they're more observing than predicting. So if you suddenly had darkness, they'd be like, oh, whoops, darkness. You know, what does that mean? As opposed to, you're right, this kind of idea with in the Egyptian religion where the sun and the sun cycle is so central. Any more questions or comments, or also questions? Yes.
How long did he reign?
Oh, so I gave you the years. I'll give them to you again. Right. I'll give them to you again. It's here we are, 1353 to 1336. Okay, so less than 20 years. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there were his son was a child when he died. So,
did he die?
That's why his son-in-law had to take over. I don't think he died in any kind of violent way. Not that I remember. Any other questions or comments? Oh, silence. Any questions about the books of the Maccabees that I can talk about for 2 hours, but I will not?
Okay. I can't resist.
Okay.
All right. I just want one more time to hear your comments. I think I've heard them already. But the way I see Chanukah is a bit of a battle between the grassroots and the rabbis. The grassroots love it, and the rabbis not so much.
Oh, you mean about the holiday of Hanukkah?
But the holiday, yeah.
You mean today?
No,
Or
no,
you mean
not
in general?
I mean, right after the destruction of the temple.
Oh, okay. All right. So I think the fact that you have okay. So you're talking about the fact that you don't have a Masechet about it in the Gemara, in the Talmud?
I'm talking. I think I get the feeling that there's a very ambivalent attitude towards it among the rabbis. The whole
Okay.
thing of my Chanukah and
Yeah.
the
Okay.
attaching
So I'm gonna say a couple things. I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna put in pieces. All right. Okay. On the one hand, and this is something that my teacher Larry Schiffman said. He said it's funny because the rabbis don't seem to know the names of the Maccabees, but they all have names of Maccabees.
yeah.
So like they don't know the names of the Maccabees, but they've all got names of Maccabees. They've all been named for Maccabees. So that's a very interesting thing that apparently they don't remember the names anymore. But it was important enough for the names to kind of really enter into traditional kind of Jewish names that you give over and over again. There are things they don't seem to know a lot. And obviously this didn't happen right after the destruction. We're talking about the Gemara. There's a lot they don't seem to know about what happened, right? And we have.
But they are familiar with Sifrei Maccabim, aren't they?
They don't seem to know, certainly not Second Maccabees, and I don't think they know First Maccabees. They don't know. I don't think they do. I don't think they're particularly familiar with the First and Second Maccabees that we have, the original ones. The Chazal. When we're talking about the rabbis of the Talmud, I'm talking about the rabbis of the Talmud. Okay, so the rabbis of the Talmud, I don't know what. I don't think they had easy access to these books. I think that they absolutely are emphasizing the miraculous and temple-centric aspect of the holiday as opposed to the military victory. And yet, in our prayer, we only talk about the military victory, right? When we say in Al Hanisim. In Al Hanisim, we only talk about the military victory, right? And we say Hallel, right? Which is a big deal. It's a big deal. Don't take it we shouldn't take it for granted that we say Hallel during this made up holiday, right? We made it up, right? It's not from the Bible. It's not, we said, okay, now we're going to do a holiday, right? Now, and the fact that the rabbis are saying, this is something we do it every year. We are codifying it. This is what you do, right? And they're arguing, how many candles is an increase or decrease, etc., right?
And now, the Karaites love to laugh at us for this.
Yeah, there's plenty. The Karaites love to laugh at us about a whole bunch of things, right? But yes, sure. But if you look at, so I think that they downplay. I mean, again, they, I don't think I know there's an attitude that says there's one thing going on in the Beit Midrash in the study hall and another thing going on in the Beit Knesset in the synagogue, right? And that those two things are separate traditions. I don't think that they were completely separate traditions. I don't see how they could have been completely separate traditions. You have people who are involved in, you have this back and forth in both. We absolutely have things in our prayers that are right from the Talmud. The Talmud's like, this is what you say, and that's what we say. And the fact that we have in Al Hanisim, which is essentially the prayer for Chanukah, we talk about the battle. Now, the idea of the miracle, I think it's interesting. I wonder, right, if the reason that this story, which we don't see in earlier literature, but one assumes that there was this was a tradition that they wrote down, right? The idea that you had oil that was impure, and you had this teeny little bit of pure oil that survived and yet managed to light the temple, right, for 8 days, right, to light the menorah in the temple for 8 days. I think it resonated with this idea of the rabbis who were the only ones who survived with the tradition, and now they're going to be able to spread it to everyone, right? I think there's a reason that they like that story, right? And it's true that we don't have that story anywhere in the books of the Maccabees, but what we do have in Second Maccabees is how important, because of and I've talked about this, about the different levels of editing and redaction of the second book of the Maccabees. Of course, it's not my work; it's Danny Schwartz's work.
Is this related to how few rabbis actually survived the Bar Kokhba revolt?
Once you get to the Talmud, it's so much later already that who knows, right? It's hard for me to say, oh, they like this story, because it could be that the earliest rabbis really like this story because of how few of them there were left, and this idea that now they're going to spread the light to everyone, and that's what Chanukah is, right? Now the fact is that the Chanukah, the 8 days, was supposed to mirror the dedication of the rededication of the temple, right? That's what the 8 days were about. And we know in Second Maccabees that on the one hand you have people in the diaspora writing about this, right? And then you have Jews in Judea taking that book, that the diaspora book, repackaging it with Chanukah information, and sending it back to the diaspora and saying, hey guys, this is why you need to celebrate Chanukah, right? And it's a fantastic example of this back and forth between Israel and the diaspora, where it's super important to the Jews in Israel that then on one hand, the Jews in diaspora really care what's going on with the Jews in Israel, because this is a diaspora Jew who writes all about these battles. And on the other, that Jews in Israel really care that the Jews in the diaspora celebrate this. And Hanukkah is just this amazing holiday which really kind of shows that. And I think that the fact that Chazal, that the rabbis codify it, is also meaningful. And I think that if they had really wanted to stamp out the military victory aspect of it, I'm not sure if they could have or not, but I don't think they try. I don't think they try to say, no, don't say that for Al Hanisim, Yes, Robin has a question or a comment?
Yes, I do. It's really carrying on more or less what you said, but I just started to read Sefer Maccabees 1.
Yeah.
And what seems most bizarre to me is that book was not accepted by Chazal into the canon, whereas a very bizarre book like the Megillah Esther, which is the most treif and impossible to understand book you can possibly imagine, is included.
Okay. All right. So there we get to what I've said before, which is that it seems that in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible that we have, one of the things that would cause something to be rejected is if it was clearly written after the time of Ruach HaKodesh, of kind of prophecy being around, because then there's no divine spirit to inspire this. You can't say there's a divine spirit in it because there's no prophecy anymore. So there's no divine spirits. There's no, right? So if you have the book of the Maccabees, it's clearly after that period, right? On the other hand, it's very important, which is why the Jews of Alexandria keep it in the Septuagint, right? Because it's such a clearly important book and about Judaism, etc. But they kept lots of stuff, right? They kept anything that looked like it was a good edifying work, right? They didn't have the same standards of believability either, the Jews of Alexandria. Like it didn't have to be super, super believable to get in, right? Now, Esther is always a question, right? Esther's always a question, but of course, Esther, and again, Esther, while like the books of the Maccabees, it explains a holiday, Purim, right? But it sets itself in the Persian period when you still have prophecy, right? I'm not saying that it's still not a question how it got in, right? But it's easier to explain just on in terms of basic numbers like that, right? It's explaining a holiday, and it's written during this period when there's still prophecy, so it can get in. And again, the date of the book for the canon, from the point of view of the canon, is the date it says it's written, right? So you can argue about when Megillat Esther is actually from, when the book of Esther is actually from, but it itself says it's from the Persian period, and in general, that's believed, right? Whereas books of the Maccabees are obviously written after the Persian period. So so like Ben Sira, they don't get included. But unlike Ben Sira, they don't read them either. So Ben Sira, all of the people, all Chazal, the rabbis seem to know it by heart, but they're not reading books of the Maccabees, so they don't know it. Probably because, well, at least with Second Maccabees, because it was in Greek. I don't think that I assume they could read Greek, but it wasn't particularly something that they would sit back and relax with, I imagine. Also because Ben Sira reads so easily as a continuation, as something that sits right between Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and Chazal, and like the Mishnah, etc. It really reads like something that just fits in between, so you could understand why the rabbis would kind of like to read it.
Which book of the Maccabees mentions Sukkot de Bekislev?
That's Second Maccabees. Okay. That's Second Maccabees. First Maccabees is a much more straightforward kind of chronicles sort of book of the Maccabean period, where Second Maccabees has a lot more, which is the one that was written in Greek by someone in the diaspora, right? First Maccabees written in Hebrew by someone in Judea. Second Maccabees written to explain the day of Nicanor, right? It explains the day of Nicanor, that if I'm sick on Tanit Esther, so I don't keep Tanit Esther, instead I celebrate the day of Nicanor, which is on the day of Tanit Esther. It's the day before the day of Mordechai. It's the day before the day of Mordechai, as it's written there. But so it was originally composed ending with the day of Nicanor, and then it was repackaged to explain Chanukah, and that was written in Greek. First Maccabees written in Hebrew by someone in Judea to be kind of a chronicle of the Maccabean revolt and the Maccabean kings. Second Maccabees written to lead up to the day of Nicanor, right? To kind of explain the day of Nicanor, but also as gives a lot of background of what was going on before the revolt, and also lots of miracles and martyrs. Okay, you've got the Akhenaten and her 7 sons story that's in Second Maccabees. A lot of martyrs. So it's got some very clear and less of an assumption that foreign rule is always evil, right? More of an explanation, like we've got to explain why this happened. Whereas First Maccabees is like, hey, what explanation do you need? Foreign rule, evil, Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Just about Second Maccabees with the story of Hannah and the 7 martyrs. I was just attending some lectures about Christianity and how big the 7 martyrs of Hannah feature very heavily in Christianity.
Yeah.
And they actually appear on. And is it possible the rabbis didn't like the book because it had essentially become almost a Christian text?
They have that story, so then why would they use a martyr story, the martyr story that Christian texts use? In other words, why would I, as a little kid, learn the Akhenaten and her 7 sons story? You understand what I'm saying? Like, if that was their issue, then they should have avoided all the martyr stories. Like, I can understand them not being wild about Second Maccabees because of the range of martyr stories, to be honest. But then why repeat that martyr story and make it part of kind of almost the Chanukah canon? You know what I mean? It's very interesting because there's a question, like, Christians have martyrologies. They have books of martyrs that tell the stories of martyrdom. Jews don't have books like that until the Crusades and the massacres that happen then. And then actually there's this kind of craze of martyrdom in Judaism, in Jewish communities, in the Jewish communities of Europe, which is very troubling to read about, to be perfectly honest. But if that's the thing, it's like, I would say that's a good explanation. Like, I like the explanation. In other words, like, there absolutely is this kind of emphasis on martyrdom in Christianity that Judaism usually kind of distances itself from. And yet, this story is repeated. And this story, which is very problematic, right? Because the youngest son, he gets an out, right? He gets an out. He doesn't have to sacrifice himself, right? So You know, and yet that story is the one that is the piece that's repeated from Second Maccabees, not in the same form, but yeah. Any other comments or questions? So happy Chanukah, everyone. It was
Happy
great
Hanukkah.
seeing you, and
Yep.
I'll see you next week.